This side-by-side comparison of an Iranian missile launch circulated through major news outlets. The human brain accepts the image on the right as real because our spatial perception naturally fills in the environmental context. But look closely at the dust clouds beneath the trajectory of the third missile. The shapes are identical. The human eye evolved to track movement and recognize patterns, but it easily misses cloned topological details hidden within complex textures. Modern editing software manipulates images precisely at the pixel level. It removes the visible seams and lighting errors that would normally tip off an investigator. Visual inspection is no longer a viable standard for establishing proof. The initial technological solution to this was active authentication. This involved embedding a digital watermark or a cryptographic signature directly into the file. The fatal flaw of active authentication is timing. It requires that specific cryptographic data to be baked into the file at the exact millisecond the camera shutter clicks. When investigators pull a photograph off a suspect's hard drive or a social media feed, that embedded history almost never exists. To evaluate digital evidence without any original metadata, computer scientists had to develop what is known as passive or blind image forensics. Passive forensics treats the digital photograph as a dense statistical dataset. Editing software can perfectly mimic the look of a missile, but forcefully relocating those pixels disrupts the underlying mathematical structure of the digital file. Forensic authenticity is established by computing the underlying data properties rather than relying on the visual representation. This flowchart represents the universal computational pipeline used by algorithms to execute passive forgery detection. The initial step is image pre-processing. The system strips away distracting visual context by converting the file to grayscale and dividing it into smaller analytical blocks. Next is feature extraction. The spatial data is translated entirely into a measurable mathematical matrix. Finally, those matrices are fed into a classifier. This is a trained algorithm, like a support vector machine, that sorts the inputs to deliver a definitive mathematical ruling on forged versus original regions. The most frequent manipulation this framework targets is the copy-move forgery, where a region is duplicated from one part of an image and pasted into another. Because the cloned material originates from the exact same source photograph, its dynamic pixel range perfectly matches the surrounding environment. It blends in seamlessly. When we feed that manipulated Iranian missile launch back into our pipeline, the system switches to a specific extraction method. It uses principal component analysis, or singular value decomposition. The algorithm breaks the image down into tiny 16 by 16 pixel blocks, systematically comparing the internal statistics of every single square in the grid against the others. Criminals generally apply a blur filter along the edges of the duplicated region to smooth out the border and hide it from investigators. That edge blurring post-processing is irrelevant to the block matching algorithm. The classifier is evaluating the core statistical values deeply inside those individual 16 by 16 blocks, bypassing the perimeter entirely. True randomness in the physical world never produces identical statistical blocks. When the system detects a perfect mathematical match between two regions, it proves the image was fabricated. The second major forgery modality is image splicing, which involves merging elements from two separate photographs. Consider this raw asset of a helicopter rescue. Now look at this separate image of a breaching great white shark. When separate photos are merged into a single composite, their localized pixel values might blend smoothly, but their intrinsic digital fingerprints clash. This clash occurs because every camera has a unique physical sensor. Those sensors produce distinct noise profiles and specific response functions to light. Pushing this composite into the detection framework requires an adaptation to the pipeline. To detect a splice, the feature extraction phase shifts away from the spatial domain into the frequency domain, utilizing tools like the discrete wavelet transform. The wavelet transform reveals a jagged spike in the image's chroma or color components. This occurs exactly at the invisible seam, where the shark's original sensor noise meets the helicopter's environment. The classifier phase uses these inconsistencies, known as Markov features, to officially flag the image as a composite. Splicing creates a permanent hardware mismatch, leaving a deeply measurable and structural inconsistency buried within the frequency domain data. The final primary modality is image retouching, specifically compositing, designed to place two people in the same room. A forger might successfully match the sensor noise and color balance between two files, but they cannot retroactively change the physics of the original light source. Notice the strong directional lighting in this portrait. Now observe the primary light source direction on this second subject. Forensic algorithms map the pixels on human faces to calculate precise three-dimensional illumination gradients. The geometry here is absolute. If these subjects are actually standing next to each other, those calculative light vectors must intersect at a single logical point in 3D space. When they fail to align, the image is fake. Lighting conditions are anchored in strict physics. Illumination gradient analysis proves that two subjects never shared the same localized space. This passive detection framework demonstrates that spatial manipulation creates detectable mathematical inconsistencies within the image matrix. When fed the correct extraction methods, the classifier reliably outputs the data required to prove a forgery. However, these algorithms require significant computational time, and they still trigger false positives in areas with uniform texture, like a flat blue sky. This dynamic creates an ongoing adversarial arms race in digital forensics. Modern threat actors apply heavy post-processing, severely scaling subjects, rotating elements over 10 degrees, and injecting additive noise, specifically to scramble these classifiers. Currently, the techniques detailed in technical literature often require manual human calibration, deployed only when an investigator already suspects a specific type of forgery. The ultimate challenge for computer science is moving beyond these localized single-method algorithms. The future of digital forensics relies on developing unified neural networks capable of executing this multi-dimensional pipeline automatically, operating at the speed and scale of modern fake news.